Russia has announced fresh ceasefire to open humanitarian corridors in Ukraine to facilitate the evacuation of civilians from several Ukrainian cities. This is Ukraine reported increased shelling by Russian forces over the weekend. The Russian military will hold fire and open green corridors in several Ukrainian cities, including the capital Kyiv, 7 a.m. onwards. Now, Russian Defense Ministry confirmed that they will hold temporary ceasefire to facilitate the evacuation in major Ukrainian cities of Kyiv, Kharkiv, Mariupol and Sumy. According to the Russian media reports, the corridors from Kyiv will lead to Belarus. Civilians from Kharkiv will only have a corridor leading to Russia, while corridors from Mariupol and Sumy will lead both to other Ukrainian cities and to Russia. Now, the Russian ministry has also confirmed that they will be using drones to monitor the evacuation, adding that those who want to leave Kyiv will also be able to be airlifted to Russia. The Kremlin has confirmed that it has decided to call ceasefire after French President Emmanuel Macron personally requested for it in view of the current situation in the war-hit cities. Remember, the ceasefire declared on Saturday failed after multiple ceasefire violations were reported, with both sides accusing each other of failing to hold fire in port city of Mariupol and nearby city of Volnovakha. Now, according to the UN tracking mission, at least 351 civilians have been confirmed to have been killed in Ukraine since Russian troops invaded on the 24th of February, and another 707 wounded. The real numbers are probably considerably higher. Most of the civilian casualties were caused by explosive weapons with a wide impact area like shelling, missiles and airstrikes. And for more on this, our correspondent Ollie Barrett is now joining us live from Latvia. Ollie, thank you for joining us. Russia announced fresh ceasefire and opening humanitarian corridors set to last for up to 11 hours, I believe. What can you tell us about this?
Yeah, as you say, the Kremlin saying that these humanitarian corridors will open in those 4 key cities in Ukraine. There's a great deal of skepticism, it should be said, inside Ukraine about whether this is a realistic offer from the Russians, given that over the course of the last 48 hours we've seen various attempts at humanitarian corridors simply not really taking off because the fighting and the shelling, the attacks have continued. So we will very much have to wait and see how exactly this unfolds. All sorts of reports overnight in Ukraine of really heavy shelling on a number of Ukrainian cities, accusations continuing of the Russians targeting civilians. We've just been hearing, for example, from the UK ambassador to Ukraine, Melinda Simmons. She says the Russian invasion of Ukraine is more and more, she says, a callous, calculated, deliberate assault on civilians. The Russians would, of course, deny that, but that is how much of the international community views what is unfolding inside Ukraine. The offer of these humanitarian corridors, if we can call it that, came after a conversation between Emmanuel Macron, the French president, and the Russian leader Vladimir Putin. Those two have been holding regular conversations. Emmanuel Macron may well point to this as a positive, as a small victory that has come out of his diplomacy, much of which has been criticised in various corners of the world for having little effect thus far. As I say, Russia announcing those 4 cities that will see these humanitarian corridors, it says, but inside Ukraine very much a huge amount of skepticism about whether they will be properly observed.
All right. Now, just for more clarity on the details here, the Russian ministry has confirmed that those wanting to leave from Kyiv will also be able to be airlifted to Russia. There are also certain corridors leading to Russia. What does that mean? What is the plan of action from there?
It very much remains to be seen. As I say, you've set out the details there of what the Russians are saying on the ground in Ukraine. People want to see exactly how that is going to take place and whether, crucially, the violence, the fighting, the attacks are going to stop. Because when we've seen efforts before, for example in Mariupol, to observe a humanitarian ceasefire, to allow people a corridor to leave, many people have simply felt that actually in the end they didn't want to do so because they felt in danger, they felt that they would be targeted, they felt that the attacks have been continuing. The diplomacy continues as well today. Anthony Blinken, the US Secretary of State, will be here in Latvia, visiting officials here, holding talks, but also a press conference this afternoon. He's in Lithuania at the moment. Anthony Blinken, the US Secretary of State, trying to show that the American support remains very strong for these Eastern European countries, which are members of NATO, members of the European Union, but also border Russia, and are very fearful about what Vladimir Putin may do next once he turns his attentions beyond Ukraine, perhaps. So the Americans will be here, as I say, to show support for countries in this particular region. Latvia, where I am, borders Russia, also borders Belarus, but as I say, a NATO member and a member of the European Union as well.
Right. Now, the Russian and Ukrainian delegations are also set for third round of talks today. What can we expect on that front?
Unfortunately, I didn't hear what you said just then at all, but the key for Anthony Blinken's visit here is partly
I was talking about the third round of talks between the Ukrainian and Russian delegation.
Right. Well, again, there won't be a huge amount of optimism coming from European capitals and the United States about those talks, given the limited progress that they have made in previous rounds. Of course, one of the areas supposedly of agreement in the last round of talks was to open up humanitarian corridors, but those so far haven't been particularly successful. Russia continues to say that its demands must be met if there's to be any halt to military action inside Ukraine. Those demands are simply not going to be met by the Ukrainians or by the international community as well. So I think many will see it as a positive that talks are due to take place, but won't be expecting a huge amount necessarily to come out of those discussions. Inside Russia, the crackdown on the media continues. We've seen a number of international news organizations halting their reporting inside Russia because of the legislation that came into force last week, effectively outlawing balanced reporting inside Russia. Journalists being told they have to stick to the official lines coming from the Kremlin, coming from the Russian Ministry of Defense, or face potential jail terms of up to 15 years. Russia also cracking down, it seems, on media and internet facilities inside Ukraine, trying to take control of the narrative that is being that is able to get to people inside that country as well. And that's why I'm here in Latvia at the moment, where we're able to report unencumbered by those media restrictions that Vladimir Putin and Russian officials have in place now inside of Russia.
Right, absolutely, Oli. Thank you so much for bringing us all your inputs on this. Now, for more on this, we're also being joined by Sviatoslav Yurash, a member of the Ukrainian parliament from Kyiv. Yurash is also the youngest ever Ukrainian MP. Thank you so much for joining us. To begin with, can you begin by telling us where you are currently stationed and what the security situation is like currently?
I'm in Kyiv right now, basically. The story is that Kyiv is preparing its defenses because the Russians are trying to siege the city. They aren't able to, because we are battling for the routes to the west and the south to keep our city supplied. And the point is, every day basically I spend between fighting and trying to bring supplies to those embattled cities around Kyiv, and trying to organize various institutions that can help us win the war.
All right, absolutely. Now, according to reports, Russian military will hold fire and open humanitarian corridors in several Ukrainian cities, including the capital. What is your assessment and expectation?
They have broken for the last consecutive 2 days those agreements. They have shelled humanitarian convoys coming out of Mariupol, a city on the coast. And again, we have to try and build any momentum to try and get as many civilians out as possible. But again, I have no high hopes there, because the Russians have been breaking those agreements time and time again.
Right. Also, Mr. Yurash, you mentioned earlier that your time is split between getting supplies for the people there and also fighting. Can you get into a little more detail about that?
The point is that as far as the usual supply chains, they're disrupted. So you have kindergarten, schools, you have just civilians that have stayed in towns that you've heard about the news, like Irpin and others, strained and utterly cut off from the ability to get basic necessities for their livelihood. And basically, I'm setting up a humanitarian office which is trying to supply those individuals. As far as the fighting is concerned, I'm a rudimentary soldier, but the point is everybody's a soldier now in Kyiv, because Kyiv is under siege and we have incursions by the Russians. They are making every so often. I've been in the shootouts in Kyiv, and Russians have been repulsed at every single of their major incursions, but they keep coming back, and they basically are building up those forces in the north, that 40-kilometer column that everybody was discussing. And the point is getting ready for that, preparing defenses of that nature to try and beat back the Russians is the goal right now.
Absolutely, you're right. Everyone is a soldier currently. Ukrainian citizens and forces, they've taken up arms and they've kept the Russian forces out so far, and they've put up a stronger resistance than what was expected. Now, how do you assess the arms and military aid provided by the Western allies?
Nothing is enough. Everything is needed. The point here is that basically, when fighting second biggest army in the world, all these supplies are useful, and we very much thank for everything, but again, so much more is needed if the Russians keep up the advance. And the point is, we'll keep fighting. This is our country, this is our land, this is our nation, and to keep it independent, free, nothing is spared. But as far as the help from the West and from all over the world, we very much welcome not just the arms we're getting also, but we're getting the international volunteers who are coming in to join the fight. These are ex-soldiers, ex-military people who just watch the news and care enough for our plight, for our independence, and who don't want to see the biggest nation in Europe destroyed by Russia's imperialistic ambition.
Right. And also, you touched on this earlier, but just for more clarity, Ukrainian and Russian delegations are set to hold third round of talks today. How do you expect these talks will pan out?
Well, the reality is that as far as the talks, there is plenty to discuss. I mean, we have all these bodies of Russian soldiers. We need to transfer them to Russia, so we have no use for them anyway. So we hope that Russian society sees this invasion for what it is, a huge calamity and terrible, terrible misdeed, and hopefully amidst Putin's regime. As far as negotiations for peace, the Russians keep raising the points which we'll never agree to. These are points which essentially destroy our sovereignty and our right to choose our future and to try and choose our nation's destiny. We are fighting for that very chance to have sovereignty over our destiny, and will not allow Russia to do as it pleases with that. And as far as these negotiations, seeing what Russians bring up in those negotiations, they come there for these negotiations to fail.
All right. And also, the International Atomic Energy Agency has concerns over the developments at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. What do you know about this?
The reality is, as far as the nuclear power plant is concerned, we have taken it back. I have a part of my family living in the city by that power plant. The point is, the Russians are trying to take hostage the entire world with those nuclear power stations, and say that if something happens, if something is done, they will do something to those nuclear power stations. It's obviously a bluff, but the point is, this is just showing that for Russia in this war, no madness is mad enough.
Right. Also, Ukrainian President Zelensky's reiterated calls for a no-fly zone. Now, how do you assess the role of the Western allies in the United States in this conflict? What more do you think they could have done?
The West has enforced no-fly zone in different conflicts that intervened in. So as far as the no-fly zone, it's only reasonable that those images that you all see of civilians killed, residential buildings destroyed by aircraft attacks and the bombs being dropped cease. And the West can do much to try and stop that. And the point is that we need that no-fly zone to have the Russian Air Force, which it's using indiscriminately to attack all over Ukraine, civilians, people that have nothing to do with the war, to finally cease action. So the point is that we reiterate time and time again the demands for no-fly zone, because it gives us that chance to truly conduct a fight to the victory here.
And of course, I have to ask you before we wrap up, how do you see the situation unfolding in the days to come? What do you think is a viable course of action out of this?
Well, as far as the decisions by the Kremlin what to use here in Ukraine, it's truly hard to say, because they've been using weapons like vacuum bombs, for example, in Kharkiv. And it's very obvious that for them, the arsenal of madness is endless. But as far as the Ukrainian position, it's very clear they will be fighting to the bitter end to do everything and anything possible to resist the Russians. Our ancestors died in droves in different conflicts throughout our history for our independence and for our chance to define a destiny. If this is our chance, we shall continue that tradition.
Right. Mr. Yaraj, thank you so much for joining us at such a turbulent time. We wish you all the best.
Thank you very much.
WION is now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the news on the move.